In this tutorial, I want to talk a little bit about splines and the interactive way in which you could use them to model. So what I have here is an example of some splines. I'm going to hit F4 to show edged faces and orbit around. So I created this using a technique called Loft. Loft is a compound object. It involves two different shapes. If I come here, geometry, or display, I'm going to hide geometry so that you can see I have two separate splines that make lines, and then a third spline that is just a basic shape. If I go out, if I come over here to modify, I can select one of my shapes here. Alright, what is going on? Why is it? There we go. Okay, so I've selected my loft, and what I can do is if I take one of these loft shapes, like this one here, I could go into the sub-object and I could grab things like the vertex points and move it around, right, to kind of adjust the shape. All right, so let's say, for example, I have this guy that's created right here. I'm going to clone him as a copy. And now if I go into his sub-object, I can go into the path and then go into the line and grab the vertex point. And what I can do then is actually grab the vertex points of the line that makes up the loft, and I can move those points around. It gives me the ability to get in here and actually start kind of reshaping, reforming this to create a brand new kind of shape and structure. So just by grabbing these points, oops, I want to make sure I'm grabbing the points and not the handles. There we go, that's the point. Perfect. Okay, so I can kind of grab these and move them around and just sort of use them to build myself a new kind of structure here. Oh, it looks like I got quite a few points here. There's that one, there's this one. I'm going to grab this one and move it over. This guy, I'm going to just hit delete, get rid of him, because I could always put a new one in. So by going and grabbing these shapes, I'm able to go in and kind of manipulate the structure in this sort of iterative way. I can go back into here and kind of build this as like a new thing, right? And so one example, kind of the example I'm sort of building for you here is vines kind of growing over a cliff wall, or kind of just like hoses, maybe. Right? There's any number of reasons you could use to kind of want something like this, and it's great because you could kind of take them and maneuver those shapes just by grabbing those points. You're going to get used to grabbing the handles and kind of maneuvering those around too to sort of get the shapes that you want. Oops. Alright, so I'm kind of jumping in and showing you sort of the late stages of what you could do with something like this. Like I could go in and refine the shape by adding an extra point, and then I could kind of pull that up to make it look like it's sitting on top here. Right? I could kind of grab these handles and move them. And I could go back and forth between the different shapes. Let's turn this point into a Bezier so it's got a handle. So I could kind of move its shape over like that. Perfect. And I can refine it again if I want to have it continue to sort of sit on top of these other vines. And you see, we kind of pull it around. That's a way you could kind of get sort of these fun shapes happening now. Another thing, there does end up being pinching sometimes. One thing you could do, lofts are actually made up of both a path and a shape. And so there is a shape here, and if I move it along the z-axis, I can adjust where that's located. Be careful when you're moving them though if you do go to move them around, because if you move them, like say you move them off to the side like that, there's no undo. So you'll just have to delete that shape and make a new one, which is easy enough to do because all you really need to do at that stage is grab one of the shapes. If I just region select, I'll find one. There he is. I can hold shift and drag him out. It asks me up here, I'm just going to make it an instance. So I can always tweak and adjust it then. Like this one here is in an odd spot. That's causing a weird geometry pinch, so I'll move him out. One last thing to kind of refine this. Go into vertex. I'm going to refine it to get an extra point here. And then just kind of move that over, because I kind of want to have it dipping underneath at this spot. And then what I might do is come over to this other one, path, go and select the path, go into vertex, and do refine, and drop an extra point in there. Ooh, man, those are right on top of each other. So what is this? I'm going to make this a corner, and I'm going to make this one a corner. So I can kind of raise him up a little bit, and then maybe I'll refine it again to kind of pull it back down. And then I'll take this point here and maybe make this one smooth. There we go. And this one in the back, you're going to make him smooth as well. And just kind of move his position so he doesn't pinch oddly anymore. There we go. So that's sort of how that process kind of works with these, where you're kind of taking those shapes and maneuvering those splines around. Now, let's talk about how you actually get these structures. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to save this real quick. I'm going to pause it for a minute. Oh, one thing I wanted to point out before I do that, you can set up on surface properties, you can turn on mapping, right? And if I were to come in here and type in length repeat, say I typed in like 5. If I had a tiling vine texture, I tell it to tile 5 times. If I put an unwrap UVW on and open that up, you'll see what it does is it takes that and it's going to tile it. So it works out great if you're thinking ahead and you turn on the UV mapping. So okay, so here I am. I'm recording again. I have my spline shape. So basically, you end up starting off with a spline that you're just going to draw out. So I've set up my grid here. So if I was to go 1, 2, I want it to kind of bulge up, kind of going over a lip. And then I'm just going to draw out kind of the shape. And then I'm just going to make a couple extra points out here. And we want to think of these shapes in 3D space, right? Because right now you draw it out and the line just goes in one direction. And so if I go into vertex, I could grab those points now and kind of maneuver them a little bit. Like if I turn this into a Bezier, I can grab the handle and adjust that. And so if I start to adjust these shapes so that they're not just going in a straight line. Looks like one of them's a corner here. Let's because he is right there at the edge, why don't we go ahead and we'll just turn him into a fillet. And that separates that out by a point. This guy, let's see, we'll just make him smooth point. Then I'm just right clicking to turn them into a different type of point. And then the rest of these guys up here at the top, we'll just make all those smooth and they can just kind of sit up there. Okay. Now, I think this guy may need to make these handles a little bigger. It helps to use the X and Y, F5 through F8 to toggle the points sometimes, so you can get control over Y and X, or in this case Z and X. Okay. Alright, so now that's kind of the shape that I want for my spline. I need a secondary shape because lofts are compound objects and they require 2 shapes. So I'm going to make a circle out here. And now I'm going to select the spline, go to geometry, and I want to pull the drop down and go to compound objects. I'm going to go to loft, and now I say get shape. And I click on this circle, and that's going to create my loft. right? So if I move it over to the side, you see the spline's still there. The loft is a brand new third object. Now I've already made a loft before. The default is 5, and so it'll be much more dense. You could drop that down to 1. There's geometry that happens. It basically, if this is the circle, if I drop it down to 0, there's only a point where there's a point on the circle. Same thing with the step, with the path steps. Those are all the points that are on the spline. Now you're going to want to keep that probably up like around 5. The shapes we could get away with 1, just to kind of simplify it, make it a little bit more manageable. Alright, so if you look at the path parameters, there's 0, and that's where this little yellow target is. If I type in 100, that moves down to the end here. Alright, and so I can get my shape, and now there's a shape. You see there's a little green shape there at the end. So if I go into the sub-object, select the shape, I can scale it down. So now my vine will start at this original shape, and it's going to adjust its shape gradually, getting smaller. So I could go back up to the loft and say, well, let's say at 75, I want to have another shape in there that's still the original size, because I don't want to get thin so soon. And if you want to tune that, you can always just go into the sub-object of the shape. You can scale it and adjust it. There's also an option if you grab a shape and go into move, if you hold shift and drag, you can drag it along the length, and you can see how I'm dragging left, right to drag it out. You do get an instance clone option up there at the top, pardon me. So I'm going to say instance, and I can just kind of go in and adjust the shape if I want to get a little bit thicker there. I can clone out another one. One thing to keep in mind is that as you're moving, if you move it off to the side like this, undo doesn't work. So it's going to try and move out to where that shape is. That's where you just need to kind of delete that shape and then get a new one. Alright, so here I kind of have my basic shape. I can look at it from the side. If you are trying to make something that looks like it's sort of kind of a vine coming down, right now it would, if you look where the Z line is here, it would be clipping the ground. So maybe I would go into my path, and then you see it gives me access to the sub-objects of the path, and I can go in and I can move those. Just note that it always switches to local, so you may want to switch that to view. So I can grab these vertex points, and I can kind of raise these up to make it look like the vine would be then sitting on the ground, actually. There we go. Orbit around, look at it. It's looking kind of cool. And then if I wanted, what I could do is just right-click and clone as a copy. And now I should be able to go in here, go into the path, and go into the line. And since it's a copy, I should be able to go in, go to move, oops, accidentally turned on snap. I'm in move, and if I just move that vertex point, what I'm doing is I'm adjusting the path that makes up this clone. And it's allowing me to go through and make another version of a vine. So I can kind of have two that are sort of sitting on top of each other. And you'll have to orbit around a lot. This is going to involve you trying to get very comfortable maneuvering in 3D space for sure, in order to get really nice effects out of this sort of technique. And you're going to have to, it's going to really require you to get comfortable maneuvering around in 3D space. I'm just going to keep grabbing points here, kind of fine-tuning this a little bit. And you could always, even if I go into wireframe, I can actually add additional points by using refine. So if I thought that was too extreme an angle, I kind of want to drip it down. So I'm going to kind of pull it down like that. And I could go through and keep kind of just sort of pulling these points around to adjust the general shape of this guy to get it so I'm kind of happy with how he looks. See if I pull this out, I can kind of adjust the shape of the spline, and then that allows me to also to come in. If I kind of want to have that sitting on the edge, sort of hanging over the side like that, I can do that. And just kind of pull our points around. And then whenever you may see weird pinching. That's definitely a thing that can happen when you're messing around with a technique like this. If I go into wireframe, I could try grabbing the handles, see how the handle's kind of pinching it on. So I could hit F8 and toggle until I get the handle controls going in the angles I want, and then I could kind of pull that a little bit. This guy looks like he is smooth, so if I change it to Bezier, I'll have a little bit more control to kind of stretch him out. And then as a final pass on this, just grabbing the shapes and maybe adjusting the shapes where they are along the length, because that's one way to get additional subdivisions in there. Most likely, though, if you're going to be using this technique, you should probably be planning on, once you're completely finished getting the general shapes you want, you'll collapse them into an editable poly and then use your loop tools to kind of go back in and sort of adjust the shapes after the fact, using like set flow and flow connect. If I come over to this guy, see, I'm going to go back to the original now, and I'm going to add an extra point in there so I can kind of have it sort of sitting slightly above. Right? And so that's a technique, and you could just keep going through and continuing to clone these shapes and make as many of these as you want. A final step might be, once you get complete, once you're really happy with it, and you've turned on, you've gotten the amount of segments that you want along the length, you've turned on your mapping, right? Whatever your mapping horn is, probably a good idea to actually, find a tiling texture that you'd want, apply it on there, because when you're happy, you could always then convert it to an editable poly, at which point down here at the end, you could do things like, I don't think you're going to want to have it just as a segment like that. You may want to just take this and relax it to make it get a little bit smaller, right? So it's not so huge down there, right? And then maybe here at the end could be something where you want to grab the polygon, and maybe you'll want to hinge from an edge. So if I grab an edge here like this one, oops, let's define an edge. There we go. We can do 90 degrees and then add a number of segments. So now that'll kind of help, so it's not just so flat. It kind of comes out as a shape. So that's one way to kind of work to finish it off. And then if there were any areas where you needed any extra geo, you can go into edge. Say I wanted to round this out a little bit, I could hit ring and then use my loop tools to do flow connect, and I'll add an extra bit of geo there. Maybe a little set flow to space it. All right, that's it. That's using splines to create things like vines or cables.